Hello everybody. We're going to get back into video mode here. Yesterday we talked about functions, what they are, talked about the vertical line test, things like that. Now we're going to talk about their graphs. And the basic idea is to understand where these things are. The domain, which is all the x values, the range, which is all the y values, and then where all the zeros are. Which again, zeros are where the graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so we'll get into it. We're basically just analyzing graphs. Okay, so if we have a graph that looks like this, okay, so what we want to be able to do is identify the domain, the range, and the zeros. Okay, well, the domain is all the x values. Okay, what x values can I plug in and get an answer for? Well, if this graph continues to go up, it's going to continue to move out as well. Same over here. As it moves up, it's going to move out. It's going to get very steep, and the numbers are going to get huge in the y, but it's still moving out. So my domain, okay, x is all real numbers, okay? And we use that R for real numbers, okay? X is all real numbers. Now, the range. Well, the range is everything that the y's are. So let's take a look. If I look here, none of this graph is below that point. It all is above that point. So in this case, the range cannot be less than -1. So the range, for y has to be greater than or equal to -1. Okay? Because the graph never goes below -1. Do you see that on the y? It never goes below -1. So that means our range, everything has to be above that. It can be equal to, because it's equal to -1 right there. Okay, but it never goes below -1. And now the zeros. Where does this thing cross the x-axis? Well, we're going to cross right there, and we're going to cross right there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got zeros at -5, and I've got zeros at 1. 2 zeros, those are the only two places that thing crosses the x-axis, and I have what I need. Okay, basic idea there, analyzing a graph, picking out the pieces you need. The domain is all real numbers. It goes forever in both directions, left and right. The range, the whole graph is above -1. So therefore, y has to be greater than or equal to -1. And the zeros, I go through -5 and 1. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Okay, first thing we're going to do is domain. That's all my x values. Well, notice this thing starts here. Okay, we'll trace it here. It starts here. There is nothing behind 0 as far as the x direction is concerned. It all happens above 0. So my domain for x has to be greater than or equal to 0. It equals 0 here, but it never goes below 0, so it has to be greater than or equal to 0. My range, okay, again, this is the very bottom point of my graph. Nothing happens below that. Okay, everything else happens above that. So that's -3. So for my range, y has to be greater than or equal to -3. Okay, there's my range. Now zeros. Okay, zeros. Where does this thing cross the x-axis? Well, it crosses here at 0. So that's 1. It crosses here at 8. And it crosses out here at 10. Okay, so there's 3 zeros on this one. Again, we'll review. The domain, everything is above 0, so x has to be greater than or equal to 0. The y's, everything happens above -3, so y has to be greater than or equal to -3. And where does this thing cross for my zeros? At 0, 8, and 10. Okay, that's the basic idea there. Okay, well, now we've got a little different issue. Now they don't give us the graph. They tell us we have to graph it. Well, going to go ahead and find my zeros here first. So it's going to be x minus 4, x minus 2. Okay? That means I've got zeros at 2 and 4. Well, that takes care of my zeros. I know I had to figure it out in the problem, so I'm good to go there. Now my middle here, axis of symmetry, I'm just going to go through and do the whole graph, is there at 3. So if I plug in 3, 3 minus 4 times 3 minus 2, this is negative 1 times 1, that equals negative 1. So we're down here, so my graph looks something like this. Okay? Well, now I need domain and range. Well, let's talk domain. This thing's going to end up going forever in each direction. Notice how the arrows are going to continue to go left and right. So my domain, x is all real numbers. Okay? All real numbers because it goes forever in all directions. Now the range. Notice, it's the y values. And everything happens above negative 1. So my range, y, has to be greater than or equal to negative 1. And we already found our zeros because we found that when we graphed it. Okay? Basic idea of what we're doing. Now these are fun. This is called a piecewise function. This is the last one we'll do in the video. Okay? There's certain restrictions that happen. You've got two different graphs based on where you are on the graph. Okay, so let's just go through and graph it. I'll graph it in black here. So the graph is x squared. If the x is between negative 2 and 1. Okay? Now notice those are open circles. Well, x squared, if I graph that and plug in points, I know it does this. Okay? I know those are basic points. Now, it's going from negative 2 to 1. And notice it's not equal to, so I need open circles at my ending points. Okay? So I've got something going like this. My graph looks like that. Just that piece. Now it's x, or 2 minus x, if you're between 1 and 4. Well, let's take a look at 2 minus x. I'm going to rewrite this as y equals negative x plus 2. Get it into slope-intercept form, something I can work with. Okay, well that's a y-intercept at 2. Okay, let's do this in a new color, blue and red. So y-intercept at 2, and then we're down 1 over 1. Okay, down 1 over 1. And notice, this time I equal 1. And I'm going to go to 4 on the x, and that's right there, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my graph, since it goes from 1 to 4, it's going to look like this. So, and I'm going to have an open circle here. So let's take a look and graph the whole thing. So I've got a parabola to here. It ends up being closed because of this graph, and now I'm down 1 over 1 to 4 with an open circle there. Okay? Piecewise function. Graph each piece and graph it in between the restrictions it gives you. Now, if we need to do some more of these in class, that's fine. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense of how I got what I got. Okay? But now I need to find domain, range, and zeros. Same thing. Domain, the x's. Well, I'm going from negative 2 all the way out to 4. So the x has to be, I go from negative 2 all the way out to 4. And notice they're not equal to because I have open circles in both of those spots. So that's where I'm going from in my x, in my domain. Now my range, from top to bottom, okay, I go from 4 down to negative 2, okay? So it's going to look the same. The range for y, it's going to go from negative 2 again all the way to 4. And again, it's not equal to because I've got an open circle at both ends. Okay? And now my zeros. Well, I've got a 0 at 0, and I've got one out here at 2 where it crosses. So 0 and 2 Here's what I'm looking for as far as domain range in zeros. And hopefully the graph makes sense as to how I got there. Okay? That's just the basic idea for graphs of functions, what we're looking for, how we analyze them. Okay? We'll see you in class.